I'll talk about Solarwinds, as well as I'll share a little bit about the attack itself, the extent of the attack and how it happened, who was affected and who was responsible. And then I want to talk about some best practices in terms of a response to an incident like that. You may be wondering, why are we talking about SolarWind, which is a software company, a major software company, and how is this relevant to us? I think for me, one of the most interesting thing is that we did look at SolarWind in around February. We had a session, we had an expert panel that looked at SolarWind, and we concluded from that session that banks and central banks were not affected. But interestingly, recently, the Danish bank was in the news. So I'll have something to say about that later on in the deck here. So what is SolarWind? It's a major software company. They provide mainly system management tool for network and infrastructure monitoring, as well as technical services. And some of their best known product is a IT performance monitoring system called Orion, which is a network management system. This is an interesting product, and this is where the compromise happened. And SolarWind had, I think they have over 300,000 clients, and about 18,000 of their clients were actually affected. So it's a big deal. I mean, it's, in my view, working with technology and computers, this is one of the scariest things that I have heard about in the cyber risk, cybersecurity space. And this story has not ended. This is a story that is still being written. So we should pay attention to it, and we should pay a lot of attention to some of the other things that are happening within the cybersecurity space. So what is a network management system, and why is it such a prime target in such a case? So these are communication tools used within the technology space. I'm not a technologist, so I wouldn't be the most authoritative person to tell you about what it is. But I do have a little bit of an information here, which the slides will be made available to you for you to inform yourself if this is not something that you're familiar with. So many of these systems are actually configured to both monitor events as well as to respond to these events. So I think what we have to think about is, when we think about the SolarWind compromise, the system that was designed to monitor for these events and to respond to these events was actually at the heart of the compromise of SolarWind event. So essentially, what we're talking about is that we were just flying blind. We were crippled, essentially, in terms of detecting and responding to the nature of this attack. That's my takeaway, my understanding of this particular case. So what is the SolarWind hack? There are indication that was a nation state attack. It was done by the Russians. Again, the story is still being written. It accessed network systems and data of thousands of SolarWinds customer, and the breadth of the hack is unprecedented. And I'll share more on that. I have this chart here to show just a bit as to what happened to the stock price of SolarWind when the news broke. So the news broke by FireEye somewhere in December, and we can clearly see on this chart a steep fall in the share price of SolarWinds. And this is what happens when we have cyber attack of these magnitude, is that, and if we put it within the context of the banking sector, which is our constituents, then this is a big deal. So a firm like SolarWind having such a steep fall in its share price, I mean, this can be destabilizing. So what's the extent of the attack? I mentioned before that um, over 30,000 public and private sector organizations was affected. It included in local, state, and federal agencies in the U.S. Where did the attack happen? It happened through the Orion network, which I mentioned earlier. Um, the firm had about 33,000 customers that used the system. This is according to information that was disclosed to the SEC document. What happened is that data networks and systems for thousands of clients were compromised. And really, I'll go in much more detail later on, is that SolarWind actually inadvertently, because they didn't know, delivered the malware via this software to its client. And I'll have a fair bit to share on that. Um, the interesting thing is that SolarWinds customers were not the only one that were affected. And this is because the hack exposed the inner workings of this software. And the hackers could potentially gain access to data and networks of thousands of customers and partners. So that's a key point. How did the hack happen? The hackers use a method known as supply chain attack, and this is now becoming a big deal. In my view, because we're central bankers and because we're working within the financial system, we should pay very close attention to this. We are having more access point in banking. When we talk about digital banking, we're talking about things like central bank digital currencies. We're talking about more digital wallets. We're talking about people working from home. We're talking about cloud services providers. So I think the supply chain attack is something that we should pay very, very close attention to. And it's something that I am learning about. So what then is a supply chain attack? And how vulnerable are central banks and the financial sector? How vulnerable are they to supply chain attack? And why is it going to be a huge deal going forward? These are some of the key points. We had a session earlier this year, I think it was around February, and these were some of the key points that were shared by one of our expert panelists, is that adversaries are looking for the weakest link. So they're going to look to third-party suppliers to penetrate, to get into system. It is extremely hard to detect, and it's evolving from malware-led infusion. It's one of many type of new attacks that are taking place. And of course, it is coming from trusted party. The diagram on your right, it's on my right, I think it's coming through on your right as well, kind of give you a kind of a pattern in terms of how a supply chain attack takes place. All right, and I have a few more slides here. I think this one is from Cybersecurity Malaysia. They use this slide in one of their presentations to give you a sense as to how a supply chain attack takes place. I'm not going to go into the details of it because, again, this is not my domain, but this is a good depiction as to how a supply chain attack take place. Right? What I want to get to is how can we, what should be some of our response. So, like we said, it's via a third-party software, and the malware actually access system files. It blend in with legitimate SolarWinds activities. It was able to avoid detection, even antivirus software, and I have a little bit more to say on that. And the backdoor use multiple strategies to mask its presence and its activities within the system. It was even able to fool antivirus tools, for example. So why was this a perfect target? And really, it comes back to this Orion software, which is used by a lot of companies. And ultimately, what happened was SolarWind, when they issued their update, inadvertently, without knowing actually that the software was compromised, delivered the code to its customers. All right. It was an extremely sophisticated attack. We usually say that cyber risk is evolving, but this one was truly, truly sophisticated. Why? Because the hackers were extremely sophisticated in terms of their development and in terms of how they operate. So the development team was able to deploy anti-analysis countermeasures. I'll show a little bit more on that. They were able to, the operational team appeared to have used specific infrastructure for each victim, reducing the usefulness of network-based indicators of compromise. In other words, and I do have a bit on this, even if you were using sandboxing for malware, even that was not very useful in this particular case. So this is a quick chart to kind of show you the attack path for SolarWinds. As I mentioned before, the system was compromised. If we start from the left and move forward, and a Trojan was actually deployed on the Orion network to customers. Then what's interesting is once in the system, and this is not the first time that we are seeing things like this, because we know with the Central Bank of Bangladesh hack, that the hackers remained dormant in the system for a very long time. It was the same in this SolarWinds attack as well, that they remained dormant for up to a period of about 2 weeks. Is there a question or a comment? Okay, I'll carry on. So as I was mentioning, the hackers remained dormant for about 2 weeks. And what they were really doing during that 2-week period is that they were gathering information. So this was kind of a reconnaissance period where they're gathering information. They're mimicking, for example, keyboard commands, for example. They're taking information on updates, etc. And this information is being fed back to the hackers for them to plan their next action. And then once they gathered the information, then they were able to, the privileges were escalated. And again, they were able to access other systems, and they were able to stealthily bypass multi-factor authentication systems as well to reach the ultimate target. So this was really a very sophisticated attack. And FireEye, for example, has said in their notice that they have never seen anything as sophisticated as this type of attack. All right. FireEye noted that each of the attacks required very, very meticulous planning. And it involved manual interaction by the attackers. In other words, they gather their information and then they take specific action after. The attackers were able to modify an Orion platform plugin called Solarwinds Orion Core Business Layer DLL. So they were able to modify it because they had gathered sufficient information on it to be able to carry out their destruction. The Trojanized component was digitally signed and contained a backdoor. So this for me is one of the scary bit about this particular attack for me, because all of us, even on my mobile phone, occasionally I have to update different software on my mobile phone. And when I get the notice of the update, I automatically say, yes, please update, because I assume that it is coming from a certified, credible source. So what we're talking about here is that the Trojanized component was digitally certified. All right, so this is very scary if you ask me. Um, if I talk about bank clients, how will I know that this update is not from my bank if it is clearly digitally signed? So that, I think this is where we should really be worried. So FireEye was able to track this component to another system called Sunburst, and FireEye has actually released update in terms of how to detect this. I mentioned earlier that one of the interesting thing about this attack is that it was able to avoid malware soft sandboxes. All right, so it was a very intelligent attack, and it was able to again retrieve and execute commands that it called jobs. All right. So essentially, the malware check file system, check for timestamps on file system, and after the dormant period, it then deployed, and it avoided detection by malware softbox sandboxes, as well as other instruments that were used to do it. And you can get more information from the FireEye update, which the link is provided there. So the malware was able, it had the ability to transfer files, execute files, profile the system, reboot machines, and disabled system services. So it masquerades in the network traffic as the Orion Improvement Program protocol. So in other words, it mimics something that was legitimate or really pretty much a part of SolarWinds systems and product offering. All right. So this is, as central bankers, as because we have responsibilities for the banking sector, we have responsibility for our own systems as well. We should not read about the SolarWind attack and think that, well, this is not banking, this is not central banking. What we should think about is the sophisticated nature of the attack, and we should ask ourselves the question, how as central bankers do we guard ourselves against such sophisticated attack, and how do we kind of direct the banking community in terms of keeping their systems safe and sound as well. And so I think this is where I come from when I read about these cases. This is how I think about these cases as well. All right. This is a kind of a chart to show you how some common sandbox evasion techniques. It's kind of like a chain. So you can see user interaction where detect users action like mouse click, document strolling. You have system analysis where you look for system characteristics like CPU core count and system reboot. Environmental awareness where they look for the verification of real life environment, for instance, find particular hardware and sandbox related process. You have the delay execution strategy, and you have the data obfuscation strategy as well. So these are different techniques that are used for sandbox. So just to elaborate a little bit more, so they store the details with legitimate prologging, as I mentioned before. The anti-sandbox behavior, FireEye noted that unless the machine is joined to a domain, the malware will not execute. So in other words, the malware was so sophisticated that if the sandbox was not connected to, if it was not live, the malware would not execute. So the malware know that the only time it should it should execute is when it's live. So the question that FireEye has asked is, are your malware sandboxes or other instrument environments domain, are they joined? So that's something to think about. Domain names, system, DNS, resolution, and IP address check. Fire notes that if the malware resolve a domain to a private IP address, the malware was not going to execute. Most malware sandboxes intercept DNS and point traffic to themselves. So this is also very interesting as well. All right. The malware footprint was kept relatively low. It preferred to steal and use credentials to perform lateral movement through the network. It established legitimate remote access. The backdoor used to deliver a lightware malware dropper, something that FireEye has never seen before, which they now call teardrop, and the dropper load directly in memory. It does not leave any trace on the disk, and researchers believed it was used to deploy a customized version of Cobalt Strike beacon payload. So these are some interesting characteristics about this attack. I mentioned earlier that it was able to avoid detection. The attackers used temporary files replacement techniques. They modified legitimate utilities. They executed malicious code. So these are just characteristics in terms of how the attack took place. So these are some pointers from, I think it's from FireEye, in terms of how to respond to some of these things. It says, when you're defending against things like that, defenders can examine logs for server messaging sessions. And this is very interesting because I think this is how FireEye actually detected this compromise. I think, if I recall correctly, FireEye noticed that there were a number of attempts logging into its system from one of its staff. And when they checked with their staff, they realized that this was not their staff that was trying to ask. So you should actually be checking your log to see who are the people who are trying to log into your systems but have failed, because it can tell you a story. So defenders can monitor existing scheduled tasks for temporary updates as well, and tasks can also be monitored. Hack is some of the best operational security exhibit by threat actors. Observe this hack is some of the best that FireEye has seen. And FireEye researchers know that these attacks can be detected through persistent defense, and FireEye described multiple detection technique in its advisory. So you should read the advisory from FireEye. I'll just take a pause if there are any questions before continuing. Ash, are there any questions?
Mark, I have a few questions, if I may.
I'm sure you do, Ale. Please.
I mean, you may talk about this later on, so apologies if I'm sort of jumping ahead, but who actually reported the hack? Or how did we find out about it?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. That's an excellent question, Ole, and that's what I was alluding to, that it was actually FireEye. So if we think about how scary this is, is that FireEye is perhaps one of the world's most prominent leading cybersecurity firms. And, when we talk about cybersecurity assessment, etc., FireEye is typically one of the firms there, and they have clients all over the world. They notice on their own systems that there were attempts to access their system. And they kind of say, oh, hold up, why is this staff having so many failed attempts? And they reached out to their staff and found out that it was not actually their staff that was doing this. And they started digging deeper, and they realized that the hack had taken place. So in around mid-December, FireEye alerted SolarWinds and the world that we, FireEye, have been hacked. And this is how we think it has taken place. And this is how we started zeroing a lot on SolarWinds as a major software provider being the main point of compromise, which spread to clients like SolarWinds and others as well.
No, I mean, the point I'm getting at is, for every SolarWinds hack, there may be two others that are never reported, that we never find out about, or that are being kept secret because of embarrassment or whatever. So it leads me to my second point in terms of, was data stolen, or was it sort of a proof of concept, or do we know what the hackers wanted?
Well, that's also an excellent question. I don't believe any data has been stolen. I think what it is number one is the magnitude of the compromise, the organizations and agencies that were compromised. So, for example, in a later slide, I have a notice from the central bank, or the Danish central bank, where it was only about 2 or 3 weeks ago that news came out that they were compromised as a part of this hack. But when we talk about state military agencies in the US, we talk about Microsoft, we talk about FireEye, we talk about this U.S. Treasury Department, the State Department in the U.S., clients around the world, number of clients around the world, the extent of the compromise is concerning. Now, we don't know if it was just, we can access your system, or if there's something to come later on. And I think, again, that's the other worry as well. They have compromised the system. Have we sufficiently cleaned the system up, or will they be able to do something else?
Yeah, I don't want to monopolize the questions here, but I don't expect you to know this, but I always find this fascinating that we think about, the usual suspects, Russia, China, and North Korea being, somehow involved in this business. And to me, coding, is this like a different language? These are non-native speakers. I think a lot of the coding is sort of English or English code or whatever, that we have these, it's more sort of a question I have, that how these, where this knowledge comes from about coding and all of this stuff. But anyway, this is sort of.
No, I think it's a good question, Ole, and I sincerely appreciate your question, because, like I said, this is supposed to be informational, but I also want to make it informal as well. So if you do have questions and comments, please just unmute your mic and jump in here as well. But you raise a very good question. So on the issue of coding, I have 2 comments on that, Ole. One is, in the case of and this instance is, it seems as if it's a state kind of sponsored attack, and in this case, it's a Russian type attack. But you mentioned North Korea, and one of the things that I have read on North Korea is that they have actually sent an army of youngsters out to be trained. So this is like a cyber military kind of a thing, all right? And so they are now just unleashing on the world. So I think that's one. On the subject of coding, maybe I get this wrong in terms of why I'm worried. But if I think about central bank digital currency, and if I think about like stable coins, or even if I think about the outsourcing of coding for different reasons, then I'm back to this question as to when we look at developments in central banking, in the banking system, around fintech, you name it, is how do we ensure that whoever have access to these codes, or the suppliers, the third party suppliers, that they are making sure that their systems and the people they employ are also of high integrity as well. So that maybe I have this bit wrong, why I'm worried about this aspect of it. But I'd love someone to share more on that for me. So that's my two comments on your question on coding.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
shall I? Thank you very much for those questions. Again, participants, if you have questions, do feel free to come in. So Ash, you will have to help me. How do I get back to my slides from here? If I minimize, okay, so I'm back. Okay, so I'll just carry on. So we kind of mentioned earlier how many the different companies that were affected. I said earlier that SolarWinds is a very high profile. They have very high profile clients. They include over 500, include a lot of the Fortune 500 companies and multiple agencies in the US. And the malware affected a lot of companies, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the companies. So Microsoft president, when he spoke at the congressional hearing, he said that more than 80% of the victims targeted were non-government organizations. So that's very interesting. The stealthiness of the hack meant it went undetected for months. I mean, we mentioned that before. We know that several US government departments and agencies were affected. This includes the Pentagon, Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, the Department of Energy, the National Nuclear Security Administration, and the US Treasury. And I have some notes there in terms of what some of the key officers from these government agencies said. In terms of the private sector that was affected, I mentioned earlier, FireEye was affected, Microsoft was affected, Intel was affected, Cisco was affected. You had hospitals and you had other agencies that were affected. I mentioned earlier that a few weeks ago, news report came out that the Danish central bank was exposed to the hack. However, the press release end of June from the Denmark central bank is that the allegations about the Denmark bank hack and backdoor to its IT system was open for 7 months is not correct. So in other words, what they're saying, from the time we got wind of this attack in December or whenever, what they're saying is that even if they were affected, their system were not left vulnerable for the entire period from December to June. So I think that's the thing. I have a link. We will share these slides. There's a link to the press release from the Danish Central Bank. But I suppose the main point we can take from this is that the SolarWinds hack is a big deal. it's a big deal. When we had our presentation session on SolarWind in February, we were kind of saying, well, banks were not really affected. But here it is that a few months after, we're hearing that a central bank was affected by the attack. So that's a big deal. Ole asked a question earlier, and I answered it. The breach was first detected by FireEye. The company confirmed that they had been infected with a malware when they saw the infection in a customer system at multiple entities worldwide. The victims have included government, consulting, technology, telecom, extractive entities in North America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East. And FireEye anticipate that there are additional victims. This is what they said in December, and since then we have known. And FireEye has actually given the attack a very specific name, UNC 2452, and identify the backdoor use, access through SolarWind sunburst. Microsoft also confirmed that it found signs of the malware in its system as the breach was affecting its customers as well. Reports indicate that Microsoft own systems were being used to further hacking, but Microsoft denied this claim to news agencies. The companies working with like FireEye, GoDaddy to block the different version of the vulnerability. So a lot has happened since December when the news came on. Nonetheless, one of the points that was made is that even when you have kill switch in place, this type of hack still takes place. And investigators have a lot of data to look through, as many companies using the Orient software were not yet sure if they are free from the backdoor malware. It will take a very long time for the full impact of this hack to be known. What was the purpose of the attack? Ole kind of asked this before. The purpose of the hack remains largely unknown. Still, there are many reasons hackers would want to get into an organization system. Obviously, is to access future product plans or employee or customer information, to be held for ransom. We're seeing a lot of development on ransomware over the last couple of weeks. And there are speculation that many enterprises might be collateral damage from this type of attack. So these type of attack have some kind of second and third order impact, and so this is something that we have to take, I think. A little bit more on who was responsible. It is pointing to Russian espionage, and I think I was listening on the news this morning where President Joe Biden, the U.S. President Joe Biden, and the Chancellor for the Germany, Angela Merkel, they met, and I think the Russia came up in their discussion. The Washington Post reported that this is an APT-29 or Cozy Bear type attack, which is an arm of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, known as SVR. And this is not the first time that they have been involved in an attack. They were pretty much involved around 2014, 2015, as well as they were involved in the Hillary Clinton campaign in around 2015, 2016 as well. Nevertheless, not surprisingly, the Russian government denied any involvement in the attack. They released a statement to say that malicious activities in the information space contradict the principles of the Russian foreign policy, national interest, and understanding of interstate relationship. They also added that Russia does not conduct offensive operation in cyber domain. Just to add a little bit of excitement, the former President Donald Trump had suggested without evidence that Chinese hackers might be the culprit. but the Biden White House has said it may respond to the cyber attack in the coming weeks. And like I mentioned, they are meeting on that. Microsoft said in February that they believe the Russians are behind it. Kevin Mandy said, based on the company forensic, it's most consistent with espionage and things that they have seen out of Russia. The executive noted that the full extent of the attack was still unfolding. This is when they testified in February. Why does the SolarWinds hack matters? The reason is multiple systems have been compromised and a lot of companies have been compromised. And this is what Tom Bossert, who was Trump's advisor, said. It could take years for us to know, to get systems secure again with so many government agencies involved. Not only is this breach one of the largest in recent memories, it also comes as a wake-up call for federal security efforts. And I'm going to get more on this a little bit later. These are a couple of things that Kevin Mandy has said when he testified before. That the hack could accelerate a broad range of changes in the cybersecurity industry. Companies are turning to a new method of assuming that they're already breached rather than merely reacting. The Business Insider reported, and the US government may have to think about how they organize their strategy for cybersecurity. Of course, this is, I'll say a little bit more on this. We always talk about the public sector, private sector cooperation on this, but certainly this type of attack will strengthen that relationship in the US. And certainly we have seen some of this kind of strengthening of relationship within our membership space as well. Here are some tips. I'm coming towards the end of this presentation. Hopefully we can have a little bit of a chit chat before we end the session. The session is, I planned it for 90 minutes, but like I said, it's intended to be informational, engaging, as well as informal. So I do want to engage with you. So these are some best practice things. The hackers are always finding a way to get in, so business should focus on trying to prevent hackers from doing damage once they're in. So in other words, if you assume that you have been breached, then you should be trying to minimize the damage. So you have to strengthen cybersecurity measures, requiring the use of multi-factor authentication and data encryption, require comprehensive vendor disclosure. This is very, very important. So if you have third-party providers, if you have vendors, you want to know about their security systems, vulnerabilities, and breaches that they have experienced. Moving forward, businesses large and small should be thinking the same way and looking to revamp their security infrastructure and ensure networks are secure and impenetrable. Enterprise must look to implement technologies that offer multi-layer protection, that proactively encrypt keystrokes and prevent unwanted screenshots and audio capture. Constantly update software is also important, as cyber criminals are also looking for new ways to exploit bugs and vulnerabilities in outdated systems. And you have to continuously be vigilant in a very insecure world. Are we vulnerable? The answer is yes, because these threat actors are using supply chain attacks and advanced adversary attack. SolarWinds hack could lead to more supply chain attacks, and the cyber attack method attackers will copy this method. How prepared are we? It's going to depend on our security systems. It's going to depend on our ability to detect anomalies in our system. It's going to depend on how organized we are in terms of our information systems. some key questions. We have to continuously think about our environment. Do we use products and services from compromised third parties? Do you provide third-party services to customers? Do you give everybody the key to the kingdom? Do you use cloud services providers? Do you build software? Key questions to ask: who do you trust? Who has the key to the kingdom? What did they last validate? When did you last validate those who you trust and who has keys to the kingdom? Do you have visibility in your host and cloud environment? Can you see all authentication attempts? If your main networks are compromised, can you operate? When did you last look at your disaster recovery plan and test your disaster recovery plan? This I got from one of our presentation in February. Is just some tips in terms of how we go forward. It involves governments, financial regulators, and financial institutions. So obviously we have to strengthen the public sector, private sector collaboration. And as regulators, we have to be vigilant in terms of our oversight of the banking sector, and financial institutions should continuously strengthen their cybersecurity measures. That's really what I wanted to share on this particular case. I planned the session for 90 minutes, but like I said, it should be informal. I'm happy to take questions and comments, so please feel free to unmute your mics and share your questions. Ash, I'll stop sharing my slides, and if you tell me how I do that, please.
Hi, I have a question here about this slide actually.
Oh, you have a question?
Monetary Authority of Singapore.
Monetary Authority of Singapore. Yes, Charles.
I have a question about this cyber contagion map. What is that actually?
Sorry, cyber contagion map.
That's at the second, at the center of this slide.
Yes. So what I would have to do, Charles, because like I said, I am not a cyber expert or a technology expert. So this is information that was shared by one of our members, which I thought was useful. I can put you in contact with the bank to get details on it, but I wouldn't be able to answer that detail of a question, unfortunately. Sorry, Charles.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, but I can, if you just send me an email, Charles. And if we have anyone on from Bank Negara, I would perhaps invite them, because perhaps they would be able, because this is supposed to be informal. Perhaps not to put someone from Bank Negara on the spot. I don't know if Siva is on. He could help me out there. All right. Okay, so if there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them as well. The ones that I can answer. Yes, Ole.
I had sort of two thoughts on this in terms of going forward. I mean, one is, and I mean, this is not only the case in cybersecurity, but it's the concentration risk. You know, we had one company that provides a crucial piece of software for tens of thousands of other companies. Of course, it makes sense that there are the big suppliers that on the one hand we want to rationalize our cyber kit, so we only buy from a small number of suppliers, but at the same time that makes them susceptible to being hacked, as in the case of SolarWinds. So I don't know how to square that circle, but we have that in sort of everything. I mean, there's concentration risk in pretty much anything. The other point I was trying to make, and Mark alluded to this, is in terms of following up on a hack, we need international cooperation. If it's someone in a basement in whatever town in a foreign country that hacks us, we rely on the cooperation of the country where the hack started to find out more, to pursue the hack and find out more about them, perhaps. So, I don't want to rain on the parade by raising these points, but again, it's not something that is alien to us as central bankers, regulators. That there needs to be international cooperation as well.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, again, we continue to invite our participants to jump in with questions or comment. Two points that you raised, Ole. One is the concentration risk, and the other is on international cooperation and exchange of information. I think these are two excellent points. So what I have learned since the Solarwinds hack is, one, there are lots of companies like SolarWinds that we really don't hear a lot about, and they are in our lives, whether we in our individual lives or in the banking, the central banking, they are around. So these are the companies that we, based on the SolarWinds hack, we should start zeroing on to, understand more about their securities and what would happen if there's a compromise at that point, from that point. So I think that's one. And of course, this leads to things like the cloud services providers as well, which is turning out to be, there are a few of these firms as well. The other bit is on international cooperation and exchange of information. I mentioned that in this particular case, only today, Eastern time, that is in the US, that the US president and the German chancellor were actually speaking about, the kind of cyber security incidents that we're seeing and how the international community need to respond to it. So I think that it's high on the agenda of the international community. So those are two excellent comments. So please feel free if you have questions and comments. I'm happy to take them as well, if I can answer them. That is.
Mangal
yes.
here.
Yes, Dr. Mangal.
Thanks for the presentation. My question is, I guess of more relevance to what we do, is this issue of let's say payment systems. With payment platforms, both especially in retail sector, proliferating with the digitization, that clearly opens itself more to cyber risk, and that can also have collateral sort of damages to the overall payment systems, because it can become systemic, not just on the retail side but also the wholesale side. So shouldn't we be thinking about what are some of the examples or case studies of payment systems, systemic risk emanating from this kind of a cyber risk to the payment systems, and what are the safeguards beyond technology? Like, should there be some kind of a capital liquidity buffers for payment systems to function if not just one payment system platform is attacked, but several, and the entire payment system is brought down to its knees, given the magnitude of this kind of explosion of payments through payment platforms and the digitization thereof.
So you've raised some excellent points, Mangal, and just for the benefit of our participants, Dr. Mangal is the executive director of the SEACEN Center, so he's raised some excellent points. And there are others, I think, on this call who could obviously respond to some of Mangal's comment better than I am. But so please feel free to unmute your mic and jump in, but I'll offer some perspective. So there are a couple of things that we are doing, which I think is at the heart of payment systems and the banking system. And it is our focus on resiliency. And really what we're speaking to is the ability to keep critical systems, critical services, and critical products available in the event of some kind of compromise. So that's a part of what our focus is on over the last probably 2-3 years. It's on resiliency, because given the kind of digitization and the use of technology in payment systems, in banking, uh, it's kind of difficult today to think that we're not going to have compromise. And that's one of the reasons why I worry when I speak about some of the changes that are taking place in payment systems and in banking. Even when we speak of CBDCs, it's one of the biggest worry in terms of the design of CBDC. How do we make it safe? Because we are going to be compromised. And how do we keep systems operating if we compromise? So that's kind of my bit on it. Liquidity buffers, capital buffers, they'll work, but I think what we're going to need is latency. We're going to need, some kind of slack capacity to be able to function.
I mean, what about some kind of cyber insurance that is more of a public good, like deposit insurance?
Okay, cyber insurance. So our next session is on the colonial pipeline, and following that, I'll do something on ransomware. I think one of the things that's coming out of some of the recent ransomware attacks is the hackers are looking at firms that have cyber risk insurance, and they're saying, what is the capacity on those insurance? So when they hold data ransom, they are demanding certain kinds of payments based on what they know the insurers will pay. So cyber risk insurance is turning out to be, it's helpful, but it's also turning out to be a double-edged sword as well.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm referring more to the public type deposit insurance rather than the private type deposit insurance, where the public sector is sort of at the heart of it in terms of ensuring the payment systems. But anyway, I mean, we can discuss this later. It's an open issue. I take it.
Yes, and above Mark's pay grade, Dr. Mangal, right? Yeah. All right. So shall we? I mean, there are other participants online. I'm sure they have views on this as well. Shall we just remain for another 10 minutes to take a few more questions if there are other questions and comments? Ash, are there any written questions? If there are
no written questions.
no written questions.
All,
okay. Okay. So I'll just I'll just stare at the screen to see if there's a question for 2 or 3 more minutes, and then we perhaps could close the sessions. Okay, so thank you very much. If there are no questions or comments, we're happy to bring this session to a close. So how I would like to bring this session to a close is, like I said, we have planned a number of these sessions over the next month and a half. I think the next one will be in about 2 weeks, which I will look at the colonial pipeline hack and specifically on ransomware, and share some thoughts in terms of response strategies. My main purpose here was to share the information on the hack, and then for us to think about how is it relevant for us for what we do? And I think Mangal had some very good comments and questions in terms of the relevancy. I mean, we are focusing on banking and payment systems, but I also pointed that the Danish central bank was involved in this particular case as well. So we shouldn't think that these cases are far-fetched from what we do. Even though they're happening outside of central banking and outside of the banking system. So that's the main point of it. We certainly appreciate your presence and value your time. Charles, on the question that you have, if you send me an email, I'll put you in contact with my contact at the Bank Nagar to try and answer that question that you had. So again, thank you very much. And we hope that you will join us again in 2 weeks when we look at Colonial Pipeline and the ransomware attack. Some of the other things that we have planned over the next 2 or 3 months, we are going to be launching a similar forum on central bank, on digital currencies, including central bank digital currency, which for now I will call it D-Day for digital currency. So please look out for some of the innovations that we are bringing to this space in terms of how we disseminate information to our member institution. Again, thank you very much. We sincerely appreciate your time. Thank you, Mangal. Thank you, Ole. Thank you, Ash. And see you in 2 weeks if you join us for Colonial Pipeline cyber attack. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.